Well, someone who's living it every day, who's there in Israel, is Trey Yingst, and he joins us now. Trey, what do you make of this latest Truth Social post?
Yeah, guys, good morning. I just got off the phone with President Trump, and he gave Fox News some brand new details on what happened with that Apache helicopter that went down earlier this week, and provided his thinking on where things stand with the negotiation. I want to start with a story the president told me, new details about the downing of this U.S. Army Apache helicopter. President Trump tells Fox News that the Iranian drone lodged in between the two pilots in this helicopter. They were flying very low. And at that point, the drone didn't explode as it had intended to. And so these pilots were trying to take down the helicopter with the drone lodged into this gunship without it exploding. And at any moment, it could have exploded, the president told me. And he said it was on fire. There was a lot of heat inside the cockpit of this helicopter. And ultimately, these two pilots were able to take it down into the sea, where ultimately they were rescued for the first time in U.S. military history by an unmanned sea drone. Now, President Trump also talked about the U.S. strikes last night against Iranian radar systems and air defense sites. He said the Iranians had tried to rebuild during the ceasefire their defensive capabilities, but they were unable to stop these U.S. strikes overnight, and they were hammered by U.S. fighter jets. Now, interestingly, President Trump told me that he is getting close to ordering new strikes against Iranian power plants and bridges, because he says the Iranians are tapping the United States along when it comes to the negotiating process. He says the bully of the Middle East is dead. And he told me I may keep going when I asked him about a possible response to the Iranian missile fire that targeted U.S. forces in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan overnight. The president said they had a chance to sign a deal and survive, indicating again that he may order new strikes against the Iranian regime in response to their dragging their feet at the negotiating table. Again, though, the latest information that we got from President Trump about that helicopter that went down earlier this week, really a remarkable story. The president called it a miracle. This drone hits the Apache helicopter, lodges between the two pilots. It's on fire, and there's a massive amount of heat coming out of the drone, but it doesn't explode. And these pilots very quickly, within seconds, because they're flying very low, take the helicopter down into the sea. And then ultimately, about 2 hours later, according to U.S. Central Command, they are rescued for the first time in U.S. military history by an unmanned sea drone. Again, the president ordering those strikes overnight to target Iranian radar systems and those air defense sites that the Iranians have tried to rebuild during the ceasefire. They weren't supposed to do that, but the president said just a few percentages of that defensive capability they were able to rebuild. And President Trump says they took out about 55% of what they were even able to rebuild. But just a remarkable story about these U.S. pilots from the Army that were able to survive this ordeal against an Iranian drone lodged into their helicopter. And again, President Trump ordering those powerful strikes overnight to send a message to the Iranian regime that he is not done. And if they are unwilling to make a deal, the president tells Fox News he may keep going.
One of the things that would stop him, that stopped him from going back, multiple things. There's people in his administration who is just concerned about the election. I can understand that, and just don't feel we should have been doing it anyway. The other thing was the Gulf states. The Gulf states were getting worried because they were being targeted, and they're worried about their oil and gas, which fuels their economy, pun intended. And at this point, it seems, Trey, by what you say and what the president just said, and what with the analysis you've offered, at this point, it seems the president says, yeah, I hear you, but it looks like it's in our best interest for me to go ahead anyway. It seems like we're getting close to that because he's able to monitor the interaction that the Iranians are having with each other, and that brings him to that conclusion.
Yes, absolutely. And the president talked about the oil prices around $80 to $90 a barrel. And remember, some analysts said they were going to be at $300. And because of the way that the president has conducted these negotiations, it has reinstalled, I think, faith in these Gulf countries who are responsible for so much of the world's crude oil production and LNG production. Remember, the Qataris account just by themselves for about 20% of the world's LNG production. I've talked with regional sources, and they say President Trump has strategic patience. And he's given the Iranians an olive branch time and time again offering them a chance to make a good faith deal at the table to open the Strait of Hormuz, abandon their nuclear ambitions, get rid of that nuclear dust, and ultimately de-escalate the situation across the region. And the president at the same time has been calling on Gulf allies of the United States, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, and others, to join the Abraham Accords. Because the larger vision here for President Trump is to develop an accords that will create peace across the Middle East and have these countries normalize ties with Israel. Because we saw the Israelis striking Iran just a number of days ago in response to the ballistic missile fire toward this country. But what I gathered from my conversation with the president is that he is working to exhaust all diplomatic options. Again, he has given the Iranians a chance at diplomacy, and they haven't taken it. The president said himself, all they had to do was sign, and they could survive. And they've chosen not to do so far. And that is why President Trump told me he is getting close to targeting Iran's power plants and bridges if they are unwilling to sign a deal. He told me he may keep going as it relates to the U.S. strikes overnight. And he said Iran is tapping the United States along, and he's not going to stand for it.
Trey, real quickly, because you've had the opportunity to talk with the president today, but before that as well. And you know he has a distinction. He calls some of these strikes little love taps. Did you get the impression that the president was doing the love taps to get them back to the table? Or are we past the love taps and the president is getting ready to restart the full operation?
It's a great question, and ultimately that's going to be up to President Trump. But at this point, again, he has given the Iranians a chance time and time again for more than 2 months to reach a negotiated settlement. And as the president has told me, and regional intelligence sources have told Fox News in recent weeks, this is a pretty simple deal. Iran has to sign on the dotted line, and they have two options here. They can either open the Strait of Hormuz and make these commitments as it relates to their nuclear program and export or destroy all of that enriched material, or ultimately this is going to resume into an intense military operation against the Iranian regime. Remember, last night, the majority of the U.S. strikes were focused on the southwestern part of Iran. President Trump ordered these strikes against Iranian radar systems and against air defense systems that the Iranians tried to rebuild during the ceasefire. And there are a variety of strike options on the table for President Trump. And so he maintains this leverage. He holds the cards here. And the Iranians thought for a very long time, according to intelligence sources in the region, that they could wait out President Trump. They thought that he cared about the World Cup or the midterms. Ultimately, he showed last night he cares about victory on the battlefield and about either reaching an agreement with the Iranian regime that ensures they never have a nuclear weapon, or ultimately doing this through force. And so, again, President Trump has a variety of options on the table here. But I think when we talk about this enriched material, it's a very important point here because we've been briefed by U.S. officials, and I want to just take our viewers very quickly through this process because it's important to understand how the Iranians are getting closer to weapons-grade material. When uranium ore is mined from the ground, ultimately it goes through a chemical process and it's turned into yellow cake. And then through another chemical process, that yellow cake is turned into a hexafluoride gas. And they spin that gas very rapidly in these advanced centrifuges that the Iranians had a lot of in their nuclear facilities that were targeted during Operation Midnight Hammer last summer. But as they repeat this process over and over again, the lighter particles go to the outside of these centrifuges and the heavier ones stay at the inside. And they repeat the process over and over again, and they increase the purity of this enriched material to around 60% purity. One step further, you get to 90% purity, and that is weapons-grade material for a nuclear bomb. And remember, let's rewind here. Before Operation Epic Fury began, President Trump tried again to give the Iranian regime an opportunity at a diplomatic solution, and their opening position was to tell U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff that they had enough highly enriched uranium to create 11 nuclear bombs. And so the president took them at their word and ultimately ordered Operation Epic Fury to begin. And now, once again, President Trump is trying to give the Iranians an off-ramp over and over, and they're not taking his offer. And that is why President Trump tells Fox News that he may carry on with more strikes against the Iranian regime until they're willing to sign a deal. And he says he is getting closer to targeting Iranian power plants and bridges.
Trey, if you missed the beginning of his head, he just talked to the president, and that's what the president was telling him. So we'll see. Thank you so much, Trey. Excellent information.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.